Last week, Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates invaded the G20, a forum of the 20 biggest economic nations in the world. I say invaded because the G20 are elected leaders. It's specifically a governmental group. So what are Bill Gates and Schwab doing there? Who elected them? Klaus and Bill. But there they were, telling the leaders what to do. They get to go there and lay out their policy for the rest of us, the top 20 nations. It tells you who is really in charge, doesn't it? What you really see are the ones who consider themselves the kings of kings. And those kings just showed up to deliver a speech and announce the New World Order. Here is Klaus talking at the G20.
Of course, if we look at all the challenges, we can speak about a multi-crisis, an economic, a political, a social, an ecological, an institutional crisis. But actually, what we have to confront is a deep, systemic, and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process. Politically, the driving forces for this political transformation, of course, is the transition into a multipolar world, which has a tendency to make our world much more fragmented. And for these reasons, events like this one, the G20, and so on, are the very important connectors to avoid a too great segmentation.
Notice, he speaks of the multi-crisis that we discussed just a week or so ago in this previous video, and how it may be the beginning of the birth pangs Jesus spoke of in Matthew 24, 4-8, a group of crises that Klaus and Bill are likely either bringing on or seriously contributing to. Also notice his conclusion that we as a world are too segmented. Now, I thought diversity was supposed to be a good thing, but not to Klaus. It only gets in his way. A one-world government can't be segmented. It needs one boss. And I guess Klaus thinks that's him. Him and his cronies like Bill. Now, if you aren't aware, Klaus Schwab is the founder of the World Economic Forum, and he thinks he knows better than God himself what this world needs. Of course, he's an atheist, and he thinks he knows better than the 8 billion other humans on the planet as well. Of course, if he has his way, he's hoping that there will be many fewer humans when the Great Reset is over. And guess what nation he feels the world should emulate? You'll find out in a couple moments. Klaus is the most famous evil villain character in the world. If he wasn't so influential, we could laugh at him and cast him in the next Star Wars sequel as the next evil emperor. The only problem with that is that's what he wants to do. He wants to be that emperor. He is famously the architect of the Great Reset, a book he wrote in 2020 during the height of the pandemic. Schwab's book might well have been called How to Peacefully Seize Power from All the Democratic Countries in the World. Yet, he says this will be good for the well-being of the people. Yeah, right. Not for the 8 billion of the rest of us regular folks, but for the 300 or so of his billionaire cronies who want to take over. Here he is at a recent conference of CEOs in Thailand, where he talks about those cronies of his.
We have to try with a collaborative platform where we integrate the best people, the most relevant people, and then to work for progress. Now the base has been formed, but we have to go one step further.
Notice he calls them the best people, the most relevant people. Who are they? Well, they're folks like Bill Gates, politicians like Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden. And these are the best and most relevant people? It depends. Best for who? Best for the globalists trying to take over. Certainly with those politicians, they're just puppets in their hands. Now, what nation does he think other nations should emulate? We talked about that before. Listen to this.
I respect China's achievements, which are tremendous over the last over 40 years since the opening up and policy and reform policy came into action. I think it's a role model for many countries, but the Chinese model is certainly a very attractive model for quite a number of countries.
China, really? With social credit scores, genocide of entire ethnic groups, they are the ones to emulate? Obviously, that is what Schwab is looking at as the model for the rest of the world. Now, here is Schwab at the recent Thailand CEO conference again. Notice the logo on the wall behind him. Does this symbol look familiar? Watch as we fill in the frills a bit. Ha ha! Now you see it. Klaus was born in Germany prior to the Second World War. His father, Eugen Schwab, was Swiss, but a Nazi helper. His business made parts for the Nazi military equipment machine. Oh, and he also ran a concentration camp. I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. This explains a lot, doesn't it? So we have a man with Nazi ties, with globalist billionaire ties, and who emulates China as a model nation for the rest of the world. Not the kind of person we would want assuming power. But that was the very next question in this interview. He was asked how to make the world want to be more global. Notice he doesn't answer that. Listen to what he says.
Earlier, we have the great narrative of so-called globalization. And everybody believe in it, and everybody think this is our shared future. Now, as the world is changing, we need to reshape again the vision, as you just said. But how to bring everybody on board?
The world has moved closer together because we are moving from a physical world much more in a digital world. And the digital world by nature is much more globally oriented. Now you asked how to do it.
Yes.
I think it needs what we feel in the World Economic Forum, a multi-stakeholder approach. It's certainly governments who have to be in the lead, but business, most of the solutions will come through innovation from business.
No, he doesn't speak of things that will benefit individuals so they'll want to be a part of a global system. He speaks about governments and stakeholders, of course, who are billionaires and their corporations, by the way. So he is saying governments need to decrease in power and corporate billionaires need to increase in power. Listen to what he says about how he has infiltrated governments with guys like Trudeau.
Young generation like Prime Minister Trudeau, half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. So that we penetrate the cabinets. The change is not just happening. The change can be shaped by us.
He says the change can be shaped by us, and he means the World Economic Forum billionaires and globalists. He assumes he knows better than we do, or better than God, what is needed. Then he talks about people and how he's going to make them want this change.
And we have to integrate the large population. We have to mentor the population and to show the future requires this change, and the change at the end ultimately will be beneficial for them.
He wants to, quote, mentor people. What does that mean to you, mentor? How is his favorite country, China, mentoring people? They're using propaganda, surveillance cameras, and social credit scores. They're doing it by heavy-handed intimidation. That's what Schwab is saying. That's how he plans to mentor you. And notice what he says at the end. Notice he says it will all be beneficial eventually. That means initially it won't be, right? Let's listen to that part again.
The future requires this change, and the change at the end ultimately will be beneficial for them.
Yes, he's setting us up for the promise that his dystopia will be a horrible place for everyone except those at the top. How is he planning to get there? Listen to this clip about a worldwide cyber attack. I think it's very interesting.
To the frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack, which would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber attack.
He says it will make the pandemic seem like a blip on the screen. Why is he bringing this up? Does he have something like this planned? Listen to what his buddy Bill Gates says about the next pandemic.
Well, the ideal is that when you have outbreaks, that you detect them early and you contain them before they go global. Less than 2% of the deaths are in the first 100 days. Infectious disease is an exponential phenomena. And so if you let it run, then it's very difficult to rein it back in.
Yes, obviously they are thinking about the next one already. When we combine this with what the G20 just announced, the G20 where Gates and Schwab were there, that in the next pandemic, vaccine passports will be required right up front. This was agreed to by all the nations that were there, which include most of the nations our listeners live in. Gates' statements imply speed, that we have to get this done quickly in the first 100 days, he said. They're planning to leave you with no time to think or disagree. Just react when the next pandemic or plandemic occurs. So we already have this guy who's sort of a Hitler-esque individual who wants to rule the world, who is already telling the G20 or the leaders of the world what to do. This is a very dangerous situation. Are the people in your church aware of this? Or are they asleep? I would say that for the vast majority they are asleep because this isn't being reported by mainstream news. Only a few alternative news channels like ours and some others that are actually reporting on this. Most people are completely oblivious, and when the takeover happens, it will happen in a lightning strike. Maybe something like Klaus's cyber attack. And then there'll be no choice. Everything will fall apart, and he and his cronies will be in charge. Have you considered that happening? How are you going to warn those in your church? It's probably not something you can do individually. We need to work together to do this. And for that reason, Marquis Laughlin, Jake McCandless, and I have formed Last Days Overcomers to do a series of conferences throughout the United States on just these kinds of topics to wake up the church. And we need your help. We need your help to be able to run them. Maybe you know how to edit videos. Maybe you know accounting. Maybe you know how to manage your social media sites. We need people to be able to help us do all sorts of things, even just volunteer at local events and be an usher. And of course, attend the event for free. But we need people to be able to do all sorts of things. We also need people who know pastors so that they can put us in contact with them, so perhaps we can hold these events at your church. We would love that to happen. If you click on this URL code that's on the screen, it will take you to our website. There's also a link down in the description. And you can tell us the kind of things that you'd like to help us with. We're going to have hundreds, hopefully, of volunteers. And after Christmas, we are going to have an online event where we're going to have like a webinar for all the people who want to volunteer. And we're going to show you the kind of things that we're planning to do and hopefully get feedback from you. It's going to be an interactive event, but we only have room for 250 people. So if you would like to be part of that, make sure you click on this also so that we know that you're interested. While you're there, if you haven't downloaded our free ebook, 10 Signs That the Last Days Have Already Begun, be sure you get that also. It's a free ebook. Now, let's return to discussing the Klaus Schwab saga, because he is really a dangerous man. Here is Schwab's trailer for the next World Economic Forum Davos meeting.
The world is a different place today.
We cannot ignore the global security issue that could impact millions around the world.
Without immediate action to support developing countries, inequalities and poverty will deepen, not to mention the geopolitical divide.
We're on the cusp of not only a climate catastrophe, but also an economic catastrophe.
The inflation rate soaring to its highest level in 30 years. Costs are going up everywhere.
Food, electricity, water, medicine. It's a very pressing situation.
But we're dealing with 7.8 billion people on Earth that need and rely on this supply chain system.
We are challenged by the number of people in need.
And these people are suffering in such a devastating way. They can't, how are they supposed to get through the day?
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
We all know that we're past the point of no return.
We lost 60% over to recycle, 9% of
It's really a horrifying situation, and as a
and technological disruption.
Existential incredible inequality and a planetary emergency.
Notice how it ended with lights out, electrical grid shutdown, just like Klaus's cyber attack scenario. Very interesting, isn't it? Now, Klaus and his buddies, their end game is what he calls the fourth industrial revolution. The first was the wheel. The second industrial revolution was steam power. The third was the computer. And the fourth, according to Schwab, will be transhumanism. So Klaus wants to make us less than human. How will that work? Click right here to keep watching and see how these globalists want to take control so they can force transhumanism on everyone. In this link, they say they'll take away your free will and your soul. And they say it like it's a good thing. Till then, this is Nelson, and I'll see you there.